often felt lonely around my peers in high school. I wasn't often interested in the conversations they were having, whether that was about the newest Nikes to drop or who was having sex with whom. And when they would try to engage with me, they would ask me questions like, who are you dating? Or what grade did you get on that test? And those questions felt competitive. They felt hierarchical. They felt invasive. They didn't feel particularly friendly to me. And so most of the time I walked around feeling like a bit of an oddball because, let's be honest, I am. But luckily I found a friend who knew I was a total weirdo, told me I was a weirdo all the time, but in a way that made me feel really seen and loved. And so I'm really grateful. Thanks, Smiley. It wasn't until I got to college that all of a sudden I felt like I was part of a larger network, like I was part of a group that I actually belonged to. And part of that is because I got to fall in with some anarchists, some musicians, some fellow wandering night owls. And the way they moved through the world was a way where I felt like not only was it something that I understood, but they were also things that I was aspiring to. So these were people that I could both connect with and look up to. And that was tremendously beneficial to me. And again, I'm just so grateful for all of those people that would stay up with me until the wee morning hours under the old growth trees in San Diego. Hi, this is Sarah Russell. I'm your microdose host here with your weekly mood boost and tools for transformation. In today's episode, we'll be exploring the consequences and some potential cures for loneliness. In an article titled Loneliness Matters, a theoretical and empirical review of consequences and mechanisms, the authors talk about how common loneliness is. So it's up to 80% of people under the age of 18 will experience loneliness at some point, and about 40% of people over the age of 65. There's a little bit of a drop-off in loneliness in that middle age range, but when you're young and when you're a little bit older, loneliness is really common. And when we talk about loneliness, we're talking about perceived social isolation. So this is less about how many people are around you and how connected you feel to those people. So we know we have those experiences where we can be all alone and completely content with that. We need that as a time to recharge. You know, introvert here. I like my alone time sometimes. But we also know those moments when we can be in a group of people and feel completely isolated and alone, like we don't belong there. So this is less about how many people are around you and more how you're perceiving the social interactions that you're having, whether or not they feel positive or negative, connected or disconnected for you. And loneliness is defined as, quote, a distressing feeling that accompanies the perception that one's social needs are not being met by the quantity or especially the quality of one's social relationships. And we know that loneliness can have devastating impacts on our physical well-being, our mental well-being, and our emotional well-being. Loneliness predicts an increase in morbidity and mortality, and we also know that loneliness affects our ability to sleep. And according to Maslow's hierarchy, sleep is the foundation of the pyramid. Before you're forming connections with other people, before you're reaching enlightenment, you need to get a good night's sleep. And part of this is because loneliness increases our sense of vulnerability, and that sense of vulnerability, it heightens our unconscious vigilance to social threats. And those states are really contrary to the relaxation we need in order to get a good night's sleep. And the consequences are even more far-reaching than that, because then by not getting a good night's sleep, then there's some kind of daytime dysfunction the following day that makes it harder to be our best selves and to create intimate, interconnected relationships. Feeling socially isolated also impairs our ability to self-regulate. And not only does it impair our ability to self-regulate, it becomes so habituated to not self-regulate that we become really unconscious of our automatic reactions to things. So we're no longer responding to things, we're reacting to things, but we're not tracking the fact that we're not self-regulating in those moments, which again makes it really hard to have an accurate assessment of what's going on and to form connections that are meaningful. Loneliness increases depressive symptoms, but it also increases perceived stress, fear of negative evaluation, anxiety, anger, and it diminishes our optimism and our self-esteem. Our perceived sense of social connectedness also informs how we perceive ourselves. If we don't have a high quantity and quality of social interactions with people, we can start turning the lens onto ourselves and wondering what's wrong with us and feeling bad about ourselves. Loneliness also makes us feel unsafe. And because we feel unsafe, we become hyper-vigilant. And because we become hyper-vigilant, we start having a hard time trusting people. And because we have a hard time trusting people, it makes it hard to form meaningful connections. This constant unconscious scanning for social threat creates a negative bias in our brains where we just start perceiving what's happening around us through this really negative lens. Compared to people who don't feel lonely, people who do experience loneliness see the social world as a more threatening place. They experience more negative social interactions, and they have a greater memory storage of negative social interactions. Negative expectations around social relating create this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy with people who feel lonely, where because they expect that a social situation is going to be threatening or negative in some way, they distance themselves from social interactions, from people, but then they also feel like they have no control over their loneliness, that like their loneliness is in the hands of other people. So they're distancing themselves while at the same time feeling like there's nothing they can do to impact their loneliness. So it's this kind of false sense of powerlessness in that moment. Now, the authors of this article have come up with 4 different interventions that could help with loneliness. One is enhancing social skills. One is enhancing or providing some kind of social support. One is increasing opportunities for social interaction. But those 3 things, which seem really obvious, enhancing social skills, providing social support, increasing opportunities for social interaction, it turns out those are actually less important than the 4th one, which is addressing maladaptive social cognition. That one turns out to be critically important. So what happens is, because we're scanning for danger and we're cultivating this sense of hypervigilance, that impacts our thoughts, that impacts our feelings, and that impacts our behaviors. And in order to tackle loneliness, it may be helpful to actually tackle this hypervigilance, the scanning for social threat first, because as they say, where attention goes, energy flows. So we have this negativity bias, but if we add in social skills, add in social support, add in opportunities for social interaction, they're going to be tainted through this negative lens of you scanning for danger, of you having this idea that like something's going to go wrong, something bad is going to happen to you, you're not safe in that environment. So even if you have more social interaction, it's not necessarily going to be perceived by you as a positive thing. So we're social creatures. And yes, sometimes we like our alone time, but that's not the same thing as feeling lonely. And if you suffer from loneliness, start with that scanning for danger, start with that hypervigilance. So it's really helpful to get a felt sense of what hypervigilance feels like in your body. So how do you know you're scanning for danger? How do you know you're in a hypervigilant state? So first, where is that hypervigilance located in your body? Where do you go when you start scanning for danger? Do you get really concentrated in your forehead? Do you dissociate and float behind yourself? Does your gut start rumbling in some way? Where is that sense located in your body? And then you can bring the 5 senses online. What does it feel like? What does that hypervigilance look like, feel like, smell like, taste like, sound like? And what are you noticing in your body? Is there a tension or a heaviness or a tightness or a constriction? Is there a numbing out or dissociation? What are you noticing in your body? And what do you stop noticing in your body? You know, some people, when they dissociate, like basically all they're tracking is what's happening from the chin up, and everything from the chin down just kind of numbs out or dissociates. Some people like completely lose their appetite. Some people flush cold. What's your physiological response to scanning for danger? How does your body know that you're perceiving there's a threat in the environment? And then after that, after you get a felt sense of what's happening in your body around your hypervigilance, ask yourself, what story am I telling myself about the current context? And is that story life-affirming or life-draining? And you can also check in with yourself, how true is that story? And I also want you to ask yourself, is your hypervigilance serving you in that moment? And that's a genuine question. The answer may be yes, the answer may be no, the answer may be somewhere in between, because we don't develop hypervigilance for no reason. First of all, we have this like biological wiring to be hypervigilant, right? Like if you hear the rustle in the grass and you don't look to see if it's the tiger or the snake, all those ancestors got eaten that didn't worry about that. You've heard me talk about this before. So having some kind of hypervigilance is a survival strategy. But then on top of that, it's likely that at some point in your life, you experienced a threatening or dangerous or harmful situation, and you developed a coping strategy for how you responded to that. And so it's helpful to interrogate whether your coping strategy in the particular context that you're in, the social context, is it actually functional in that moment? Is it harming you in that moment, or is it doing some help? And again, like we don't want to be able to completely turn off our survival strategies, but we don't just want them running on automatic, like on an automatic response constantly either, right? We want this to be a choice. Is this hypervigilance actually serving me in this moment? Am I responding to a current moment experience, a present moment experience, or is this a historical response? So what I want you to be thinking about is, do I need this hypervigilance in this moment? And if it feels like you can be safe enough to put it down, what would it be like to put it down for 3 days? What would it be like to put it down for 2 weeks? Would you be willing to try this experiment that maybe you don't need to be constantly scanning for danger, that you're actually resilient and capable enough that you'll be able to handle what comes your way? And if that feels scary, just know that these responses, again, are so automated, are so habituated, are so reactive and automatic that you're going to be able to pick it up automatically if you need it anyway. So are you willing to try to put it down for a little bit just to see what else that makes available? So start with observing yourself. Name what it is you're experiencing, and be curious. Be really curious about what's happening to you. Be really observational in what's happening to you, and be careful about what story you're telling about what's happening in that moment, knowing that you have this negativity bias. We are meaning-making creatures, and it is so tempting to tell stories as a way to try to protect ourselves, but it's questionable how effective that actually is and whether or not it's actually doing more harm than good in a lot of these situations. Relationships are also a way that we create meaning in our lives. And we do this regardless of how much reciprocation is present, right? So if you think about your favorite author or your favorite characters from your favorite book or a movie that you love or a TV show that you're watching, you start to develop a connection and a relationship with those characters, even if they're not reciprocating with you. So our relationships are one of the ways we tell stories about the world around us, tell stories about ourselves. And so what would it be like if you were able to put down your guarding enough that you could actually start extending meaning making and connection into real world relationships that would be fulfilling, that would be satisfying, that would be a cure for some of this loneliness that you're experiencing if you didn't feel like you had to protect yourself quite so much? So see if you can lay down your hypervigilance in order to build true intimacy. I'm really curious what that's going to open up as far as the quality of your life. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this, please leave a review on Apple Podcast. It really helps us out. And you can also check out our YouTube channel, and there's conversations going on over there. I would love for y'all to jump in on that. You can also go to trendswithbenefits.com to check out all of our written work and sign up for our weekly newsletter. If you're struggling with relationships, with the relationships you have, with the relationships you hope to have, the relationships you want to have, send me a voice memo. Send it to podcast@mudwtr.com, and I would love to help you with building relationships, cultivating new relationships, caring for the ones that you already have. So go ahead and send me a voice memo, and I'll respond to it on this podcast and hopefully offer you a little bit of support, a little bit of help. And for my listeners, we have a special offer just for listeners of the Trends with Benefits podcast. We have a new product. It's Mushroom Boost, and it supports immunity, vitality, and mental sharpness. It contains a blend of 8 mushrooms, and all of the mushrooms are USDA certified organic. And you can use the code BOOST25 for 25% off your first order of Mushroom Boost. Here's hoping you find your mycelial network.